home. We were just having such a good talk that thought we'd just go live and finish it out. So how about we reset where we were with the pyramids? What do you think?
Yeah, we were talking about, I was kind of mentioning the location one. I think that's a really interesting, that's a brain tickler there. So, I mean, is that either numerology or coincidence? And the comment about that was that the latitude for the Giza pyramid is analogous with the speed of light out to 8 digits, which is interesting.
It is, and I want to talk about the speed of light, but I want to frame it too because I think the question trying to answer with the discussion around the pyramids is whether or not a civilization existed before ours, right? And what that was and what that means and how that plays into religion and all of that, right? And when it comes to see, because this is when we talk about the garden, I wonder if there's not a couple gardens, right? That one of the gardens was this pre-existing civilization that lived in some type of utopia and spirituality, and that the exiting of that garden was many things, like to be not only spiritual and like the creation of the first atoms and all of that as well, but also to be the fall of maybe what we think of as Babylon. Like this is where it gets really confusing because I don't know the right word to use, but that there was a civilization, whether that's Babylon, Atlantis, ancient Egypt, whatever. Does that make any sense? How I'm framing that?
Yes, but I guess I just have a much more chronologically historical oriented mind. For
Yeah.
example, like I was mentioning earlier, I take Genesis as both like an oral folk tale from Jewish tradition as well as historical. I mean, like I was mentioning to you, I think that the garden was, it could have been experienced like physical reality, like you and I experience now, but I believe it was more of a spiritual reality. And I think that it was situated. I mean, the Bible specifically says where the garden is. It says that it was in Mesopotamia. It was in between the Tigris and Euphrates River. And I mean, it gives historical timelines and accounts of people that I think line up with like history. For example, if you take Adam and his generations of sons, which each living, anywhere from 900 to 1,000 years or so, and you line that up with, okay, what I was talking about Göbekli Tepe earlier, that would make sense with Noah's story being around 4,500 BC, because that would align with, a Sumerian flood myth, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I look at all that data.
I like that. But then when we get to the Tower of Babel and the fall of Babylon, which I believe are the same, right? Tell me, do you have the same interpretation that the interpretation that the Tower of Babel being destroyed and the fall of Babylon are at the same time period, or are those separate events?
Um, Now Babylon as a culture is very specific. I mean, you can talk about like King Nebuchadnezzar, etc. The Tower of Babel
Yeah.
was much earlier in Genesis. I think that was, I think it was Babylonian culture. I mean, I think it was more of like maybe a ziggurat, but I think really what it was is explaining man's situation that they were trying to create, out of their hubris, basically a monument to their honor, to that they could reach the sky, that they were creating their own way to heaven. And I think that the Bible clearly says, that God reached out and kind of confused them so that they wouldn't be able to speak with each other. So I think that there's a distinction between the Tower of Babel and Babylon. But as far as your question about like civilization before, I don't think so. I think that
Okay.
what I was telling you before is, I think the story of Genesis, for example, the garden was timeless. There was no linear time, and if there was, maybe it was cyclical. Day one, day two, day three, day four, five, six, seven, and then it all starts over. If that makes sense. I don't think you would live, to X amount and then die. So I think basically what happened is man as we see it now, like conscious humans, not just like a primate or whatever, emerged at that time. And I think it's analogous with the fall. And I think the fall of man essentially altered not necessarily the creation story, and I could be totally wrong about this, which I probably am. It's basically your argument is whether God created everything completely and perfectly, and I think the fall kind of changed the perspective of that because it created death, if that makes sense, which the original system was built on harmony. It worked in the opposite fashion. There was no like particle decay. There was no competition. Energy. We didn't have to consume each other, or animals, or food, or whatever. Really, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
And
I just have.
I think
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
whenever we emerged at that time, that God cursed the ground, which was spiritual creation, into matter by putting a hex on it, which bounded the boundless energy that you and I were talking about before. And I think that the boundless energy can't really be bounded. So what we're experiencing now is just a phase, if that makes sense, where the thing shifts into creation and then rescinds back into herself. But I think to sum up what I'm trying to say, I think that the fall essentially changed the timeline of reality. I mean, you look at sites like Jebel Hood, that kind of shows that there's like some sort of evolutionary process, if that makes sense. And I think that that's not necessarily something to be scared of. I think that can be analogous to how God creates. I think he could create instantly perfectly, and then if we failed, we fall, then it changes to what we experience now, which is linear time.
I like that. So I like all of that. Okay. And it all makes a lot of sense. I just think it's a lot of stories that have been compressed into single stories. So I agree with, largely, I agree with the things that you're saying about the garden. Could it also be the First Nation that emerged after that? Adam could not only represent like that first everything that you said, but also represent the first civilization that emerged after a catastrophe of sorts, right? Whether that's a war, whether that's a natural event, whatever the case may be, that those could be multiple things at the same time. And when we talk about the line of history, this is why I bring it up, because I try to understand, okay, if we have languages, different languages recorded at certain dates, like where's the original language? When did that happen in the mix of things, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because it seems like that could correspond to what we're talking about with the Younger Dryas, that the Younger Dryas could maybe be the Tower of Babel getting destroyed, and that the order is kind of messed up. We talked a little bit about, you know what, before I go too far, let's try to pick one and zoom. So the Tower of Babel and the confusing of languages. Like, do you have an idea on the timeline for that in particular?
I mean, I'd have to go back to the scripture and find exactly what you're talking about, but and I know exactly what you're talking about. Ah,
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. No, it's not to put out. It's not to
I
put
would
out. So
say that
because
it's in between the emergence from the garden and Noah or whatever. I'd have to go back and look at the timeline, but I generally adhere to the chronological timeline of the Bible, and I think history aligns with it. I think mathematics, a lot of it align with and converges with the timeline of the Bible. Like I was saying, for example, if you look at Genesis and you look at each generation of Adam and his sons, they live to be, if you add it up, and then Noah comes out at the exact time that the Sumerians were kind of recording their flood myths, like with Gilgamesh, etc., if that makes sense. And I
it
think
does.
to answer your question about the Younger Dryas, I won't really extrapolate beyond that, but I think, and you and I, we've talked about certain things. For example, the Younger Dryas era, that's debated on. Like, scientists debate whether it was the Taurid meteor stream, like being
Mhm.
bombarded or whatever. And then I have friends, and uh, my assumption is that orbital mechanics and the zodiacal precession cycle, if that makes sense, and really kind of some of the orbital mechanics within our solar system too, uh, has an effect on Earth's mass. Like, for example, the way that gravitational energy works on the Earth, it changes and reorientates the core of the Earth, which then will kind of extrapolate its energy outwards. So I think my friend Daniel Clancy, I would point you in his direction, and I can talk to you more about that offline. He has a really interesting theory about all of that. It's called core dynamics and rebalancing, geophysics, basically. And I think that makes sense because it lines up with a lot of those catastrophes line up with zodiacal cycles, if that makes sense. Like, for example, every 12,000 years, there seems to be some sort of catastrophic event like that. And I think we're kind of
Right.
seeing evidences of it now. If you look at the core, I mean, the core of the planet is moving now. That's like a hotly debated thing. I would reference, scientists like Y.U. Barkin. He's a Russian scientist who speaks on this. He speaks on like the SAA, which is the South Atlantic anomaly. It's like a magnetic anomaly in our magnetic field. So I would look into that. That might be something that would tickle your brain as far as younger dryas goes.
No, I like it. I like it. How about we go back then to the speed of light? 'Cause, right, we brought that up in relation to the pyramids.
Yeah, 3 times 10
I
to the eighth.
Yeah, this is because that's it, definitely that constant has some meaning for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a problem with the speed of light as a constant, though. We know that speed of light has, or that the wave has different speeds in different mediums. Like the speed of light through air is not the same speed of light as it is through a vacuum. And the explanation for that comes down to the wave particle duality, which I think has been also misinterpreted. And that's, I don't know, do you have an idea? How do you interpret photons and particles? Do you interpret them as literal physical objects or as mathematical symbols?
I think both. It's kind of hard to answer that question, but I would say to put bottom line up front, bluff, I would say that what we experience as energy, as matter, is excitations of a geometric constraint to unbounded energy. So, like I was mentioning, the garden where we were before, and then a hex put on that energy. And I think that that is what we're experiencing. And I think that it can be experienced. To answer that, I would say it's essentially pixelated. I would argue that space-time is discrete.
So I love everything that you're saying. I'm just going to use different words and see how you feel about them.
Please do.
When so if we take the ether as the in between, as the medium for light, and then the hex that's applied being a capturing of that unbounded energy within multiple layers, like within an atom, within a cell, within a person, within an organ, like in different various layers of consciousness, and that holds true at each of those layers. And so that garden can represent the ether, that we were then bound for that unbounded energy and spirituality, and everything is one, the primordial soup that is then we're bounded into individuals, right,
Mm-hmm.
from atoms up, and that the particles are mathematical tools. Most of the particles are mathematical tools to represent energy transferred in those discrete packets, but that it's really all like the double slit really only indicates wave behavior until the wave contacts the detector, and then you have the collapse of the wave function. But like, what does that actually mean in reality?
I think
The
it's
way I go
observation
ahead.
is what's important. Like I think what that by the way, that's a really good statement, and that's hard for me to unpack. But what I would answer with is, I think the energy that we're talking about, if you were to remove the geometric constraint, that it would be experienced in the way that you're kind of alluding to, where consciousness would be collected in communion with what I would argue God, Jesus
Hmm.
Christ. I think that light essentially emanates from Him. And I think what you're saying is, if we removed the geometric constraint, that we would be in eternal communion, worship, consciousness, if that makes sense. And as it
Yes,
always was.
and that geometric constraint is multiple things to include our physical body, so that our soul
The
is the
physical body
ether
is an
is yeah.
excitation of the geometric constraint. Does that make sense?
It does just on a
Insane level.
seemingly unfathomable level of
I'm
layers,
telling
right?
you
Like,
that what we're describing is the person who snapped his fingers and made all that, and it's just a story to them of love. That's what that is. That energy is love.
I
And that
completely
love
agree.
came here for you, and it wasn't a Gnostic, you know, thing. It was a personal thing, because that's what you are. And it personally reached out and said, "Hey, man, I'm talking to you." You know,
Is that inherent in everyone from a starting point, or something that has to be earned?
I think that's something everyone experiences, and everyone either chooses and listens and leans in, or they don't. And I think that's the crazy part of the story, is that we have the free will to choose. And I think that choice will eventually be final. And I think that those who make the choice not to lean in and listen will be ejected from the energy, which is essentially hell. You will be in a place where there is no communion with God. There is nothing forever in torture and torment, if that makes sense.
It makes total
Because,
sense. We have with the same ideas, just different interpretations of how those ideas are applied, but the same
yeah,
ideas. Because the way I'm looking at that, I'm looking at that's part of their plan to eliminate the idea of God, right? To replace God with a virtual entity that you no longer have that, because once the idea is gone, the idea is gone. Like, if you don't have this concept, it's just not there anymore for humanity. And if it's not there for humanity, then that is that nobody's thinking, that you turn off that conscious part of you, and that conscious part of you and that light that you describe as with Jesus, like that is in everyone, and that everyone has the ability to access that if they so choose.
mm-hmm.
Just like we're saying, it's just how does that actually shake out in physical reality, that we differ a little bit, right? But I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out kind of which point to zoom back in on, because I think it's just about the way, and being kind and loving and all that. And that idea does not jive with the Old Testament. That's the problem that I have, is that does not jive with the Old Testament. It jives with a lot of the New Testament, but they're dependent on each other.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. I believe that it was created by, the Spirit, that He guided. I think that you are maybe not really looking at this as a spiritual battle, and I think you're not really taking into account the the source of it all, if that makes sense. The source of love. I mean, that's what He is. He loves you, and it's a perfect love story, if that makes sense.
It 100% does. And I mean, and actually,
But
when you said that too, it resonates with all these movies that I've been breaking down too, of how it's a love story about trust.
I would say Lord of the Rings is one of the best analogies for this.
But with that same thing in mind, I still just go back and I go, that's not this love. This loving description is not the description of. That's not what happens in the Old Testament. Like, even with Moses and his exodus into, like, it was all about
Well,
him
because
being able to
it's
do his sacrifices. Like,
yeah, but he's more than just that too. I mean, that's the perfect example of who he is, but he also holds might and he answers to no one. Like whenever he returns, dude, he's not going to be like kissing people on the forehead. He's going to rip the sky open and a sword will penetrate from his mouth, you know? I think people do have a nuanced idea of it like that, and I think that to perfectly sum up what I'm trying to explain to you is that there is no greater fear to really other than to fall into the hand of the Lord. But that's also the beginning of wisdom. The beginning of wisdom starts with the fear of the Lord. But being in his hands is terrifying until you learn to trust him, if that makes sense. Like think of Job.
I'm with it. Here's just big picture, like spitting my crazy ideas out, which is that the Younger Dryas period, something bad took over. That it is a spiritual war, and that the collective conscious is real, and that it is a battle within that, and a battle within thought that requires prayer um, and real, genuine discernment. And so I think that it is those spiritual things and physical in different instances within the same story. Does that make any, like, the same story being told is applicable to both a spiritual and a physical event
I think they're
separately and
intimately
together?
intertwined. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. But at the same time, it's a weird experience for us because before it ever began, it was already written, yet we're experiencing it, if that makes sense. That it in the
I disagree
beginning,
with that part, though.
okay.
So do you think, how about this one? Do you think, like, so when we talk about time, right, and even Einstein and being able to how manipulate time with movement and all kinds of stuff, like, do
Hmm.
you think the future is already occurred? Do you think it's already happened and we're just living it out, or do you think we're writing it as we go?
Both, like I said, I think time is a falsehood of our like perception. I think that originally in the garden there was no time, there is no such thing as time. We emerged from infinity and we're going to go back to it. We've always been there, and I'm saying the scripture kind of alludes to this. Like look at Ephesians, for example. It talks about how Christ knew who all of us were before, and I think that's kind of alluding to the garden consciousness that we were speaking on. And it says that he adopted all of us in his blood. So that's what it sounds like to me. It's almost like a story of, and it's beyond really my ability to completely comprehend, because
Yeah.
I've wrestled with the questions forever. Are certain things, for example, are certain people irredeemable? And it's just like that's a thing that's been very difficult for me to deal with. But it's almost like when you focus on the laws, the rules, which are important. You mentioned the Old Testament, etc. But it's almost like when you focus on what the story is about, which is love, that's what it's all about. It's about redemption, which is the strongest form of love. You get what I'm saying? Putting down
A
your
hundred
life for
percent.
someone else, and then for someone who doesn't deserve it, especially. That's what I think it is. And
I
I
couldn't
think
agree with
that you
this. I
have
think
to
that's your
take,
neighbor.
yeah, I think if you try to remove that from the divinity of Christ, then you don't have anything to go home with. I'm saying that's who it is. I'm saying you can't really separate those two. I mean, that's why
Okay.
Christ says, who is it that you say I am? He's basically saying, uh, I lost my own train of thought there. Hold up.
Oh, you're fine.
He, he's basically saying that you cannot have goodness, even in your actions, without me, if that makes sense, because he is the source of goodness. Whatever works you think you do, even if you have done pretty much everything, like the rich young ruler, he kept all the rules, blah, blah, blah. Jesus is like, great, save but one, give away everything. And the guy's like, well, shoot, I can't do that. He's like, yep, you can't follow me. that's what it takes, if that makes sense. He was saying the same thing to Nicodemus. If you try to separate the works, the belief, all that from Christ, then you don't have anything. It's not even what it is. It's a falsehood then, because he's the source of it.
Yeah, I just think it's in everyone. Like, I don't think it's within an external individual. I think it's within everyone, and it's that same thing that we talk about with the choosing that consciousness within you and choosing to think and love and all of that. That everyone can be Jesus. That's the thing. Like, when I could, that everyone can be the anointed one, that, because that's what the Christ, it means the anointed one, right? Like, anointed with what? And we often say with, some people say with blood or with, I'm saying anointed with consciousness, anointed with thought, anointed with love and care for your neighbor, and willingness to do all that. And when you boil that often aligns with a lot of Gnostic type of thoughts. I don't like putting any of it in a box. I don't call myself Gnostic. I don't call myself any of those things. It is what it is. It is, you know what I mean? I am what I am. Like,
yeah,
it's not, yeah.
Go ahead. I think,
No.
and those are great points. And I'm saying, I think Gnosticism takes the opinion of more of metaphorical, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I'm
And
saying
I do too.
it's
Yeah.
literal, and
Right.
it will continue to be literal, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think I
yeah.
agree with what you were saying earlier. Everyone gets the choice, and Christ was kind of speaking to that. I mean, he was telling people, he's like, you are like gods. You are like gods, because those who choose in him will have eternal life and be joined with him, with the Father. You can't get to the Father unless through him. And he tells you exactly how to do that. And after he died, he gave us the Holy Spirit to be able to listen to that, to have the communion with him here until he returns and brings those that have chosen in him to that energy, to the Father. Everything else that is not of that energy, the vine, will be ripped out. It will be thrown to the fire.
We're on the same page. It's just, do you think that there's a place for both of these thoughts, right? Because, like, I respect everything that you're saying. It's like, it's the same thing. It's just a slightly different application of it, right? Like, do you think that there's a place for both of these interpretations under a single umbrella? Like, do you think that both of these interpretations, whether metaphorical or physical or literal, can
No,
exist
because I
under?
don't think Jesus metaphorically rose from the dead. I think he literally rose from the dead. And I think he literally ascended into heaven on either Mount Tabor, my namesake, or Mount Hebron, I believe is the other one that was argued for. And I think he will literally come back to material reality and perfect it so that we may live in it for Revelation says that we're going to live in perfect reality for like 1,000 years. And then we'll go beyond wherever the Father is. So I can't comprehend that. I can't explain it. I mean, I hope he comes back and rules Jerusalem instead of the current regime for a millennia, and we can all have, perfect experience of human life and community, and then move on to what he says is new creation, a whole new creation. So everything that you and I experience now, even the gardener, maybe it might be, you know what I'm saying? Because everything we experience, everything we ever have experienced or will, he just made because he wanted to.
Well, that was really well said, man. And this has been an awesome conversation, and I super appreciate you coming on and having this talk with me. And I would like to pick it up again soon, if that's okay with you. I'm pulling up, so I'm gonna go in and see the kids now and unwind for a minute, if that's all right.
Likewise, man, and great conversation. I think that there's, room for all people at the table to talk about it. And I think, we both made really good points and we understand each other.
Oh, dude, this has been. I just want to, like, I can't echo it enough on how much I appreciate it, and that this is the point. Like, this is what I'm trying to do, is just it doesn't matter. It's not take my idea. It's not listen to that idea. It's not. It's just let's think about it. Let's talk about it.
Hmm.
Let's try to make intelligent conversation and points and blah blah. And you did, absolutely. Your ideas are really well thought out and founded and extremely appreciated. So, I'd like to do this again soon if that's okay.
Likewise, man. Keep being
All right.
egotistical.
Right on, brother. All right, dude. Have a good night, man.
You too, man.